Hi everyone, this is Amy from the Helms Academy, and today we'll be doing our Reading and Writing Club recap from October 13th, 2020, when we talked about figurative language. So we're asking ourselves at the beginning, what does figurative mean, and what is the opposite of figurative? I think the quickest way to understand what we mean by figurative is to look at that opposite word. So the opposite of it would be literal. If I say, literally, there were thousands of dollars on the ground, well, that means actually we saw thousands of dollars there, right? You could count them and that would be accurate. But if we said that figuratively, like we were over exaggerating, like that person must have dropped thousands of dollars on the ground, maybe we're saying that as an over-exaggeration, and that's figurative language. Figurative language can also be about making a comparison with something that's not a direct comparison, but rather is telling us something about the quality of what we're comparing with the other thing that we're comparing it to. So figurative language, we want to stray away from the literal meaning of what we see, and we want to read into what they're trying to communicate about the thing that's being compared or explained here. The easiest way to get to know figurative language is to look at some examples of what it is in context. So today, we'll be going through a few different types of figurative language, and then we'll be looking at a poem at the end and trying to decode what the poet is trying to communicate with this particular piece. So the first part of figurative language we're going to cover is a simile. And a simile is a comparison that uses like or as. So for example, if I say this computer is as slow as a sloth, you can see I have the word as in there actually twice in this situation, just to show a comparison there. So is the computer actually a sloth? No, of course not. But we can compare the slowness of the sloth with the computer. And that helps us to build a better image or a better understanding of what the computer is like. Similarly, I could say she holds her head high like a queen. Well, you can imagine the pride and the way that a queen might carry herself in a public situation. And so if another person who is not a queen is holding her head high like a queen, we can imagine maybe what that looks like and feels like for that person. Same thing if we said, my new winter coat is as light as a feather. Again, here we see that as comparison. And of course, we're not saying that the winter coat is a feather or even that it's the exact same literal weight as a feather. But if we imagine how light and airy a feather is, then that could help us understand what the winter coat is like when you put it on. And lastly, if someone says to you, run like the wind, well, there's a light comparison. Of course, they're not telling you run at the exact same speed as the wind or become invisible like the wind. They're telling you that the wind moves swiftly and easily and quickly, and you should run in that same manner. Now, our next piece is called a metaphor, and a metaphor is a direct comparison, often using a be verb. So we'll see on here the be verbs is, were, and in multiple different situations. So let's look at our comparisons. If we say, my brother is a monster. Now, this is a little bit stronger than saying my brother is like a monster, but both of them are still figurative. It's just two different ways to think about it. So you can imagine a monster is scary or destructive, or it tries to ruin something that you are doing, tries to scare you. So you can make those comparisons with how the brother is acting, not that that brother is literally a monster. Secondly, her speech and demeanor were ice cold. Now, if you can imagine, sometimes we'll talk about how people were warm and welcoming. That's another example of figurative language, and this is the opposite here, where we say the speech and demeanor, the way they carry themselves, were ice cold. So if this is ice cold, you can imagine it kind of gives you chills. Something that is ice cold doesn't necessarily make you want to stay somewhere. So we can get an idea of what that speech and how that person carried themselves was like. Our third one says, with the kids home all the time, our house is a zoo. I know some of you may feel this way as we are in October of 2020 and perhaps you have children at home doing remote learning. So our house is a zoo. House and zoo right, are not the direct comparison here. This is not literal, but if you think about the many wild animals that would live at a zoo, the smells and sights and sometimes chaos that occurs at a zoo, that's the comparison we're making with the activities happening in the home. The next one says her eyes were pools of cool water. And again, we want to be careful not to be literal here, because if we just say her eyes were pools of cool water, say, well, she had water in her eyes, maybe she was crying. Well, this is figurative language in this situation. We're using a metaphor. So we want to think about a pool of cool water. And especially if you're thinking about it on a nice hot day and you see a pool filled with cool water, wow, that's relaxing, it's refreshing. So think about when you look into this person's eyes, what feelings might come up if they feel like pools of cool water. Now, our next one is called personification, which is giving person-like qualities to a non-human thing. So for example, if I say the sun smiled down on us for the day of the wedding. Well, of course, a sun cannot smile, but we can imagine what that means. Obviously, smiles come with a certain joy and happiness. And on the day of a wedding, we'd hope for good, beautiful sunshine. So instead of literally meaning the sun had a smile like a human, we can imagine the sun's almost giving a gift to these people and happiness to them. The second one says the crows scolded every intruder that walked by. Now, scolded, we think of maybe a parent and a child, someone getting in trouble, they get scolded for their behavior. Crows, of course, don't necessarily have that same human reaction to things where they would scold someone. However, if you have passed by a crow or a group of crows at some point, you may hear their caws and the noise that they make. And sometimes it feels like someone's scolding you. So this is a person-like quality that we're giving to a non-human thing. However, it helps us to understand a little bit more about what it feels like to walk by those crows and what their sounds are like. The third one says, a loose plastic bag danced in the wind as it blew far across the parking lot. Well, a plastic bag, of course, does not dance, but can you picture it when a bag gets caught in the wind and you see it spinning around? It almost looks like a dance. So it helps to give us a really good visual. The last one says, the mess on the kitchen counter stared me down until I gave in and cleaned. Now, of course, the mess cannot stare someone down by itself, but it can kind of give that feeling, right? When you walk into something and you know you have to clean it and it feels like you're not going to be able to get away until you actually finish the task. That's the feeling we're trying to get with this type of figurative language and personification. Now, our next one is onomatopoeia, which is a word that represents a sound. So for example, at night, you can hear the owls hooting outside. Well, hoot is the noise that the owl makes, so hooting is the word that helps us to better hear and understand that sound. The next one, the sausages sizzled in the frying pan. Well, we can all imagine when you hit a fresh sausage onto a frying pan and the sound that comes up. That's the sizzle. So this particular word is a form of onomatopoeia. It helps us to better understand the sounds that go with this so that we can get a better full picture of what's happening. The next one says, I can hear the moo of the cows and the quack of the ducks through the open window. Well, moo of the cows is the sound the cow makes, and quack of the ducks is the sound that the duck makes. And our last one says, the drone whirred and buzzed through the air. So whirred and buzzed are both onomatopoeia to help us better understand the sounds that are happening. Our next one is called a hyperbole, and a hyperbole is an over-exaggeration. So for example, if I said, she has a mile-wide smile. Well, of course, it's not actually a mile wide, but we can imagine how wide the smile looks on her face. Now, I told you a million times not to do that. Some of us have heard this before, or maybe you have said it before to others. Now, usually this is an exaggeration. You have not actually said it a million times, but it may feel like you have said it so often that it's getting close to a million. Now, your book bag weighs a ton. Now, a ton is actually about 2,000 pounds. So a book bag weighing a ton would be pretty impressive. But we get the idea that when we say something weighs a ton, That's hyperbole to show us that it weighs a lot. And our last one says, at 6 a.m., I was blinded by the light of day streaming in my window. Now, most likely this is just a reaction, right, to light, where it makes us to squint and it makes it difficult to see at the beginning of the day. Now, lastly, we're going to look at a poem that has figurative language in it. This is part of the poem Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. So let's look at one stanza at a time. This one says, you may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Here we see that comparison between this person rising and the dust. So if you think about someone trotting in dirt, if you are kicking at the dirt and pushing it down, inevitably dust comes up out of the dirt. So we think about, someone treating this person poorly, they're lying about them, they're trotting them down, but like the dust that comes up when you hit the ground, also this person will rise up from that situation. So here it says, does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? Because I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I'll rise. So let's look at the oil wells first. If you think about the time when this was written, especially, someone who had oil was going to make a lot of money. Still, even today, as we're moving away from less sustainable options and moving more into eco-friendly and sustainable options, we still see the value of oil, right? It provides gasoline, and it provides a lot of income and money for those who own the oil wells in those industries. So if you are walking like you've got oil wells in your living room, well, surely if you got them that close and you have so much extra of it that it's in your home and it's belongs to you, then you're going to carry yourself in a certain way, right? You probably are carrying yourself like you have a lot of money. Now remember to keep that distance from the literal here. This person's not saying they actually have oil or they have lots of money, but they're walking like they have them. Now, also, if we see the like moons and like suns and like hope springing high, that's a comparison again with the rising. So the moon and the sun every day, we know we can count on them no matter what happens the day before to rise. And like hope springing high, that gives us a great visual of what it means to rise. Now our next one says, did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes? Shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries. So we see a sad tone to this particular stanza, and specifically when we see the shoulders falling down like teardrops. So of course the shoulders and the teardrops are not the same, but it helps to give us a visual. Teardrops fall out of people's eyes when they're very sad or upset by something. And in the same way, if you think about physically, when you feel overwhelmed or when you feel very sad, oftentimes the head comes down and the eyes lower, but also the shoulders will fall. So if we think of shoulders falling like teardrops, it both gives us that sad feeling, and it also helps us to give a good visual of what that means. The next stanza says, does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard, 'cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. Well, if we think about gold mines and oil wells, again, we have that similarity. Not that this person actually has gold mines or this person actually has that kind of wealth, but they're laughing and they have that kind of carefree manner as if they do have that kind of power and control and money. The last stanza says, you may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. So shoot me with your words, right? We're thinking of how words can be very damaging. Cut me with your eyes. Think about how looks and the ways that we look up to or down on other people really affect them. And in this case, it can be a really negative and hurtful effect. You may kill me with your hatefulness. Well, of course, hatefulness as a concept itself cannot kill, but hatefulness and the actions that it creates in others may actually lead to really damaging or even deadly effects. And still, like air, I'll rise. We think of, with all of these heavy words and these heavy ideas that we talked about, this person says, like air, like a lightness, a flow, an openness, that person is going to rise. So this is a great example of the type of thing you might see on the test where you'll have a poem and it'll have some figurative language in it. But you may also see figurative language in other types of readings on the test as well. And throughout your life, as you continue to be a lifelong learner and reader, you'll continue to see it in many different circumstances. And it can really add a lot of richness to the text that you're reading. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you'll check out our other videos by subscribing to the YouTube channel and exploring all we have to offer. We're also on Facebook and Instagram, and you can find us at helmsacademy.org.